in the Department of Religious Studies here in the school at FIU. He's also founder and co-director of Counterpoint, Navigating Knowledge, which is a non-profit based in Berlin, Germany, that holds public discussions over social and ecological issues. So perfect, I'm glad that you're here. He's a recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship and a Humboldt Fellowship, and won a 2022 award from FIU for excellence in research and creative activities. Amongst his numerous publications, which there are too many to all list them, are with Kevin O'Brien, Environmental Ethics and Uncertainty, published in Routledge 2019, as well as co-edited with Karen Bray and Heather Heaton, Immanence, New Materialism, and Planetary Thinking. I think you're going to tell us a little bit about this today. His next monograph is going to be entitled Critical Planetary Romanticism, Religious and Scientific Sources for New Materialism, coming out in this year with Columbia University Press, so congratulations on that. And it's not only that I'm glad that you're here, but he has also a very significant birthday today. It should be no numbers, I'll let you do this if you want, but so can we all just say happy birthday, happy birthday? You have to take it out. No, yes, exactly. Of course, it's a solar powered good luck cat.
I love it.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, good. No problem. It's got to be solar powered at least, right?
Look, it's already starting to wave.
That's great.
Exactly. So good luck and congratulations, happy birthday.
Thank you.
So the next presentation will be by Professor Maria Donoso. I hope Donoso, right? I pronounced it. Thank you. Professor Donoso is the UNESCO chair on sustainable water security at the Institute of Environment in the College of Art Sciences Education at FIU. She's presently coordinating the international programs for the Institute. She has a master's in science from civil engineering from the People's French University in Moscow, and a master's of science in ocean engineering from the University of Miami, and a doctoral degree from the University of Federico Villarreal in Lima, Peru. Ms. Donoso's research, Dr. Donoso's research and professional interests are integrated water resource management, air, sea, land interaction, and climate change, and its impacts on the natural environment. She had also a number of international posts, including director of the Center for Hydraulic and Hydrotechnical Research in Panama, and invited professor of ocean and atmospheric sciences at the Naval Academy of Colombia. She previously was also, from 2003 to 2010, the UNESCO regional hydrologist for Latin America and the Caribbean. So you do have quite a resume here. I hope you can share some in your presentation about that. She has served as a member of the Inter-American Water Resource Network and the World Water Council, and is also a member of the editorial board of the journals Aqualac and the Hydrological Research Letters. And then last but certainly not least, I'm very happy that we have our colleague from not very far, Professor Leslie Paul Thiel from the University of Florida. Professor Thiel is a distinguished professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Florida, and his interdisciplinary research focuses on political thought, technology, sustainability, and the intersection of philosophy and the natural sciences. Dr. Thiel serves as a specialty chief editor for the journal Politics of Technology and Frontiers in Political Science. And his journal articles have appeared in all the best outlets in our discipline, such as American Political Science Review, Perspective in Politics, Polity, New Political Science, Policy Studies Journal, and the list goes on and on and on, so I'm going to abbreviate here. He has published 10 books, including The Art and Craft of Political Theory with Routledge in 2019, Sustainability with Polity Press 2024, and Human Agency, Artificial Intelligence, and the Attention Economy. That seems also very pertinent, but a different topic. The Case for Digital Distancing, published with Palgrave Macmillan 2025. Okay, so with that being said, again, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here, and please, you can present either from the table or from up here. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's nice to be part of such a great panel. not sure why I'm here. Okay. Thank you also for the gift and the happy birthday. So I usually start out this lecture, it's just sort of a meta perspective on what we're talking about today, given that I'm in religious studies, I feel that's appropriate. So I usually start out by asking, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the word nature?
Home.
Home?
Outdoors.
Outdoors?
Mother Earth.
Mother Earth?
Green areas?
Green areas?
Life.
Life? Good. Very often I ask this question and no one says, me, this room we're in, this technology, this microphone I'm on. So the question is, how have we extracted ourselves from nature, which I believe has led to a lot of the environmental problems that we have now, this extractive understanding of knowledge, starting with what it means to be human, and then how can we write ourselves back into the rest of the natural world? So that's what I want to talk about. So many people have been involved in this discussion, so I'm not saying anything that's new, but who is this extracted human of the humanities, for instance, right? This idea that we have the human sciences and the natural sciences, which then becomes the basis for our university system, and then that's globalized Western-style education, that the human is somehow different from the rest of the natural world. So not only that, but we usually have the ideal human, right? If humans are extracted from nature, then what is the ideal human up to which we're living? If we transcend nature, what is that ideal human that we're all being judged by, right? And oftentimes in our Western history, that's been a white male, cis male, heterosexual, this sort of thing, right? And then nature then becomes raw materials for some humans, right? As well as some humans becoming raw materials for other humans. And so we have this understanding that once we are above nature, the rest of the natural world is somehow dead stuff that we can then use towards human ends and towards human progress, right? And we can talk about this in terms of the history of ideas of Christianizing, enlightening, cultivating, colonizing, educating, developing. These metaphors of quote-unquote progress are not just from religious ideas, but also they get taken up into science, right? Think about the dream of, or think about the extractive sciences we have. Technology transfer is usually about treating nature as stuff to make human lives better, and in terms of that, only some human lives, right? So the science is implicated in this as well, right? Despite the fact that we have ecology and evolution, we still somehow see humans as the most advanced or something like this, and nothing sort of displays this better than the transhumanist ideas, right? Elon Musk, we're going to leave the planet and go to Mars, right? Or we're going to live forever. Death is an anomaly, right? What is being saved in this migration is not all of life. It's a certain human intellect, right? Who gets to go to this new reality, right? So we live in this sort of understanding of humans as exceptions to the rest of the natural world, and then this gets sped up through our fossil-fueled times, what some people call the Great Acceleration, beginning sometimes mostly people say after World War II, but the big advances in technology, communication, and production, right, that speed up our time and accelerate this process of extraction, right? And for some humans who can fly over the world or get in touch with the rest of the world at the tip of your fingers, right, it has this space-time crunch. So it seems like we are sort of outside of the rest of nature, right? Because we seal ourselves off from it. We have the money and resources to stay away from the pollutive, the pollution that's caused by these extractive sort of industries, so on and so forth. But it's also deceleration for some, whose local places are destroyed, both human and non, right? And this idea, right, of progress depends upon this sort of constant transformation, right? Especially the idea of progress that's tied to a neoliberal sort of capitalism, right? So my argument here is that some of us have become so accelerated and out of this world that our hopes and dreams are also out of this world, right? What we can do in a single lifetime today, think about what that was for people 100 years ago, 200 years ago, right? We can just do too much. So our our lives are outstripping, our very values and hopes and dreams are outstripping the carrying capacity of the planet. Right? So we see this with things like climate change, the sixth mass extinction, our own anxieties and stresses because our bodies can't handle the speed at which we live. Right? Today I'm here. I live part of the time in Berlin, so I'm back and forth. I'm flying to Arkansas after this, and it's like I'm going all over the place, right? And I'm not unique in this sort of situation. So I tend to agree with this guy, the late Bruno Latour, who's one of his posthumous books. He still has some coming out that people are putting together. If we lose the earth, we lose our souls, right? And he asks, what is the scale with which we should be thinking? Should we be thinking about the universe, sort of out of this planet? And he says, no, termites should be our role models because they do not lay waste to the earth, nor are any of them insect Elon Musk who seek to relocate to another planet. That's escapist. But when you think in terms of a critical zone, you're locked in, you cannot escape. A critical zone is a space between 2 and 3 kilometers thick above and below the surface of the earth, but all discovered life is within it. Everything that we know of about life is within that critical zone, right? So it's great to think of outer space and to understand the universe, but perhaps in a grounded sort of way, right? Thinking about us as this is we are Earthlings first and foremost, right? Not Marslings or Martians. So I think in the past, in the past 10, 15 years especially, we've not only had the sort of reattunement caused by climate change, right? What does it mean to live in this climate change sixth mass extinction event, but also from the pandemic, right? We have the before COVID era and now the COVID era, right? The BCE and CE. We're more aware of sort of, ironically, even though we're in an era of increased nationalisms and narrowing of political views, we're also much more aware of the I Can't Breathe, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement that get accelerated during this COVID period, right? Because I think people have time to pay attention more, right, during the COVID era. Many people, except for essential workers, of course. But these movements are I think, fueled and get more traction because we have time to sit and think, right? I think one of the reasons that you had the 60s and 70s and all the activism that happened, right, is because of the GI Bill and things like this that allowed for more people, different types of people, to go to the university and have different ideas, right, about the knowledge that's being produced there. But also, you didn't have as high costs of health insurance or student loans, right? And now you have to go to school, get your degree, so you can get a job, pay off your student loans, and get healthcare, right? So it's like you're caught up in this fossil fueled cycle, right? When do we have time to sit around and critique what's going on in terms of these fossil fueled times? So I think COVID gave many people some time to breathe, right? To notice birds, to notice even what it means to not have as much traffic on a daily basis. There was a seismologist in the UK who studied the what do you call it on the Richter scale? The seismic waves caused by rush hour in London, and he was studying it for a while. And during COVID, it was like 2 points less, right? So even our very movement on the Earth, right, is causing sort of these micro changes. I won't say aggressions because we don't have to live micro changes, right? So I think that the world's religious traditions have lots of things to say about how to get out of this fossil-fueled reality in which we live, right? Things like yoga and meditation are about slowing down, right? Reconnecting with your body, recognizing that you're a part of a larger whole, right? Taking more time to hike, right? Or even bake, right? Which a lot of people started doing during COVID, right? About all the sourdough. I was one of them. I was a sourdough person during COVID. Some people were knitters, other people were bird watchers, right? But people to slow down and realize the world around us so we're not just caught up in our own single tunnel of time, right? Thinking about what I'm gonna do next, right? Traditions that use entheogens, right, to create altered states, This is taking us out of chronological time and helping us to understand, open up to perhaps the time of plants and trees and forests, right? Music is often outside of this chronological sped up time, right? It transforms us into a different space. If you've ever been in a choir or a symphony, you know that you're sort of lost in the movement of the music, right? And not this sort of incessant sort of chronological ticking of the clock that starts with the 0 point at GMT, right? Trance and chanting, the same sort of thing. Fasting also allows us to really understand time in a different way, because you know exactly how long a day lasts. If anybody is in the month of Ramadan right now, anyone's fasting, Ramadan Mubarak, but also you are very aware of time, but not in a chronological sort of way. Again, tricksters and shamans are constantly getting us out of these human understandings of time and getting us to understand the time of trees, or the time of the coyote or the raven, right? The time of the spirit world of the ancestors, so on and so forth. So I think there's many ways in which religious traditions can help us stop and reflect on this sort of not only human exceptionalism, but the speed at which we live our lives, which is, I think, problematic. So the most recent book that's coming out is mostly about this, planetary times, right? How can we think of ourselves as part of the rest of the natural world? And one of the areas I study is 18th and 19th century, what I call romantic scientists, or what Dalia Nasser calls romantic empiricists, right? But these were emerging scientists before science was so hyper-disciplined that you had someone like Ernst Haeckel, right? There's lots of problematic things about Ernst Haeckel, but you had scientists like him, or von Humboldt, who were artists, who were philosophers, who were ecologists, who were proto-evolutionary theorists, right? Point being, nature wasn't just a resource, right? That nature was alive, and to study nature brought us closer to the ideals of truth, beauty, and goodness, right? The holy trinity of the Greeks, if you will. But the study of nature was not just about what it can do for us, right? And we are a part of nature, right? You have many forms of religious naturalisms today, right? People that understand evolution as a sort of neo-animism, right? Everything is alive, and we're just recycled atoms over and over. Or you can even take that back to the universal level, right? The cosmology, that the whole expanding process, 13.5 billion year expanding process of the universe is about we are stardust, right? Thanks, Joni Mitchell, right? So, but we are just recycled stars. Like all of this, everything that's in the universe is from the same elements of exploded stars, right? So, there's also several philosophical movements, the new materialisms and the neo-animisms, which are not going back to, but trying to understand how everything exists on an immanent plane. So all of our thoughts, all of our languages, all of our dreams, all of our religious ideas, all of our creativity emerges out of the same process of evolutionary life. There's not an outside from which it comes, right? What does this do? It opens up forms. It opens up, there's no ideal forms, right? So we are part of nature naturing, and just like there are different ways of being a bird or a fish, there must be that many different ways of being a human, right? So it opens up ideas about sex and gender and all these sorts of things to multiplicity, right? Because you find this throughout the evolutionary history of life. There are many different ways of being X, Y, and Z. I think it's strange that only animal that has races are humans. What's that all about? So these things are constructed, right? And what happens when we replace humans within nature, and life is more about this process of differences bubbling up, right? I think these return towards immanence, return toward thinking of nature as alive and valuable, and not just because what humans value, right, or how humans transform it, can also open us up to different understandings of times, right? So we can talk about the times of rivers, or mountains, or bees, right? And how different entities experience life differently, right? Due don't want anybody to see less of this. How different species of things, because of our embodiments, including humans, different humans experience life differently based upon how our capacities for sensing the world around us, for feeling the world around us, right? The time of a bee is much different from the time of a human, which is much different from the time of a tortoise, right? And so these are just different experiences. They don't have to be collapsed into one and sort of ranked. So I think more of time as reverberation, or as they say in Indonesia, rubber time. Sometimes it bends, it stretches, and it sort of it gets more narrow. And time as, I'd like to use this metaphor of a starling murmuration, right? It's not linear. There are patterns, but it kind of goes in different directions, right? And so the world of evolution, of cosmic expansion is not a linear event, right? And I think that if we begin to see, instead of always looking towards a futuristic progress, which progress for whom, progress for what, because it always depends upon the destruction of something before, rather let's turn inward and see and sort of try to understand how our policies and our regulations are affecting different bodies differently, right? And then address those cartographies of violence by which some bodies are being harmed by the policies and laws and ideas that we have, and then rethink them and reattune to try to alleviate that violence and suffering. And I think something like an eminent perspective helps us to see, to listen to many more voices, and to keep your eye on this sort of distant notion of progress, right, for some. I'll stop.
Thank you. Quite telling that while you were speaking, like, we were cutting ourselves off of nature outside,
Yeah.
right, with the blinds coming down. So thank you very much. That was, I think, a lot of food for thought. So if you have questions, please note them down. We'll have enough time, hopefully. Thank you. Thank you. We have enough time to kind of raise those and discuss those afterwards. But next is Professor Maria Donoso, and I think you have a PowerPoint as well prepared. Thank you.
Well, good morning to everyone, and thank you, Christine and Markus, for inviting us at the Institute of Environment to share some thoughts on water security. So let's see how this goes. I'll try to step behind this so that I can see the screen. So we're going to talk about water security and try to identify how to address the new challenges that are every day being very dynamic and changing, and with the objective of attaining sustainability. A lot of people talk about sustainability, but then what do we have to do from the perspective of water security? But first, what is water security? Sometimes water security is wrongly considered that it relates only to integrated water resources management, but it's broader than that. And water management, or sustainable water management, is part of water security. So I think that there are numerous definitions, but if I were to choose one, and it's not because of the bias of us being a UNESCO chair, it's because there were 3 years went into discussing this particular definition. And if I'm going to read it verbally, so it's water security is to attain a sustainable future. The population must have the capacity to safeguard the environment and have access to adequate quantities of water and of acceptable. So if there is a more comprehensive definition of water security, I'd like to hear about it. And I want you to take and look at 2 concepts, the concept of quantity of water and quality of water. And that has been the core 2, I will say, principles that originally guided water security. And for some time that was acceptable. But today we have to be aware of that water security is really, in itself, the key challenge of the 21st century. Having said that, I want to go to the concept that we just defined. So water security is for humans, yes, but it's also for industry and for progress. It's also important for agriculture, activities such as recreation. Good thing they put the shades up, you know, and of course for nature. So we have to see it in one big holistic concept, because what could be good for one of these different, I will say, systems, whether it's a human system, the environment, or progress, could be in contradiction to another. But so keeping in mind that we have to comply and be supportive of not just humans, but in a number of other things that are crucial, like food and nature, our united, you know, relation with nature. And of course, we have to have progress. I mean, but that progress has to be not just progress for progress, but progress that will make us have more access to spending time with nature, our families, our friends, traveling, getting to know the world and beyond. But at the same time, provide for all of the different species and all of the different ecosystems that exist. So having said that, then we have to have mechanisms that allow us to turn these concepts into policies, because at the end of the day, society is linked to different regulations or different cultures that encourages or discourages certain behavior. And we use laws, regulations, policies to actually create a relationship between humans to survive and to coexist, but it should also be a relationship with nature and other ecosystems that exist in the world. And from that perspective, if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the targets that the international community has set up so that we can advance towards sustainability, taking into account not just our own needs, but also the needs of the ecosystem and the rest of our planet and beyond. In that context, we can see that attaining water security is really a journey that has to be of self-reliance. And that even broadens more the concept of water security. And we need to add this, like I said, and I'll repeat it again, cross-cutting impact to really achieve water security objectives. And that is transmitted through addressing the various development goals that we have set ourselves. Whether that's good or bad, I think we have exaggerated and tried to do so, have diverted into some more policy and political oriented mechanism than what we really intended at the beginning, but they're still there, and it's a guide and we have to deal with it. So having said that then, what are the challenges? There are different challenges that impact water security. Some are conceptual challenges. What do we understand about that? Physical challenges. I mean, water is finite. It's not just some abstract concept. Also, there are social and economic challenges. For sure, scientific advancement and innovation challenges. Policy and political science-related challenges that impact water security. And we are going to talk a little bit more detail about conceptual challenges, physical challenges, and science and advancement and innovation aspects because of where we are at the university. So let's talk about conceptual challenges. And I was saying at the very beginning that water security is usually thought as in terms of the quantity of water that we have available to fulfill different needs and different objectives, and the quality of the water. What would be the physical constitution and the chemistry of the water, again, to address the various challenges that we have for a sustainable society. But if you ask us, what is the conceptual contribution that our UNESCO share here at FIU has contributed to the advancement of water security and its new understanding today, not 20 years ago, I think is that it is important to consider security per se. And I'm going to talk about what is this. And if you recall the definition, it started by saying that communities have to have the capacity of safeguarding the resource and the sector. But that safeguarding has been kind of like wiped out, and we have concentrated on very easy things, which is quantity and quality. So when we say safeguarding, and security per se, is that our resource has to be safe. And today, the resource is also not safe in many cases. For example, pollution from erosion, or technological processes that really use more water than they needed. It is not safe because we have created some infrastructures that are beneficial to bring us electricity, progress, etc. But at the same time, these infrastructure under extreme circumstances, this is the Itaipu Dam in Brazil, with all of its water going through the river after a big flood, and it poses not just a threat to the dam, but also to the communities that are downstream. So all of these things are part of water security, and sometimes we ignore it. And the same goes in terms of the communities that live in various environments and deal with the water differently. Do we use the water that we need for agriculture, or do we use more than we really need? Why? Because we tend to stick to one particular type of, for example, planting rice. How can we save 10%, 15%, 30% of that water? So there has to be an interrelation of how we go about water and assure us that the security of the system, the aquatic systems, are taken into consideration. So in that regard, the security per se has to be, as we said, for the water itself, for the resource, but also for the sector. Why? Because you can have all of the amount of water that you need to fulfill your present needs and at the level of humans, nature, etc. You may have the best quality of water that would allow you to work and bathe and drink, but if the resource is not safe, if the resource is being threatened by ourselves or external, but migrations create a lot of stress, for example, on water resources in countries that were areas where they didn't have that problem. They had all the water, beautiful water, great water, but so what are the mechanisms? And the same for the water sector. If the water sector is not safe, and we'll talk about some examples that make the water sector not safe, then you still have the whole water that you need, good water, but it doesn't reach, or you cannot use it. So, and I'm going to say that in order to do that, you have to plan, and you have to plan beyond things that we consider don't relate to water security, and that is, for example, transportation. And transportation, for example, for Panama, is important because when boats go through, they use water that is for nature, beautiful species. So what do you have to do? You have to plan for it. You have to introduce mechanisms that allows you to work. And for that, you do water security plans. These plans need to involve everybody, not just the people in Congress or those who have access to political organizations or or organism. So in a nutshell, as it was said earlier, water security is an integral part of national security. And by saying so, you have to consider the per se security of water. And so the physical challenges, well, one of them is the variations in climate. Forget whether you want to call it climate change or not, but climate is constantly varying. It has been doing so through the ages, from the dinosaur up to today, and it's going to keep changing, and it's going to still have variability. Some of that variability has been introduced by humans. Some of that variability is just normal, natural. So we have to make sure that we don't exaggerate what humans are doing, or vice versa, we do not diminish, because only if we have real information and we know what are the mechanisms that are leading water excess or water drought, and then we can start talking about how to solve the problem. But if we try to manipulate the problem and trying to, for it to translate into this, because that's what I want and that's what I'm interested in, and so on, then we are really not solving the problem. We are just kind of like giving it some hope or some not permanent but transitory solution. So it is important to be aware of things, and it's not just from the physical or the scientific perspective, but how does this translate into economy? For example, there will be, if we had what the IPCC considers in Chapter 3, that there will be a 40% gap in the global water supply, that's going to have implications. So again, we have to be aware that whatever happens out there in the environment, whether it's droughts or the change of the soil, big cities, or major storms and hurricanes that destroy, that all invites social security. And of course, we have innovation challenges, and among them, the worst is microplastics. So that microplastics are today in our blood, and there are studies that say that on a normal basis, 10% of the composition of your blood is microplastics. So it goes all the way to the level of cells. So we need to make sure when we talk about water quality that there are no good regulations from that. And if we really have to say the ones that have progressed the most in terms of regulations to include microplastic are through the European Union New Water Directive. So there's a lot to learn, and the problem is that most labs do not have the capacity and the needed equipment to detect microplastic, or what they call today the invisible pollutants, that are such a scale that only very high level laboratories can detect that. So in other words, our regulations for water quality are wrong, and we have to redo them, and we have to be aware of that. And finally, I want to talk about cybersecurity, because one of the major, I will say, problems that we have in the water sector is cybersecurity. And you don't see this in the news because nobody prints this, and nobody talks about this. And of course, if you have a water utility that has been hacked, and for example, the quality of the water has been compromised because they have accessed the equipment that tells you how much this chemical or that chemical you have to put in the water to make it potable, and that is changed in many cases just by milligrams, and that could kill people. That could have people be sick. And every day, cybersecurity becomes more and more of a problem for the water sector. There's increased vulnerability in the water sector. Nobody does anything manual anymore. Everything is done through computers. At the same time, for example, distribution of water, it's not done, again, manually. There's nobody that goes and opens the gate so that the water passes. No, everything is done through computers. If it's done through computers, it could be hacked. And you may have, and that could also mean that if you don't open the gates in a dam like the one we just saw at the beginning, the water, what it does, it goes over it. And what does it happen? It destroys it. And all of that big reservoir just goes down, and God forbid, your city or yourself are downstream. Also, you put, once the water is, you can use it, they're put in these big towers. If that tower goes down, you can have good water, you can have a lot of water, that's it, you don't have water security. And so on, you can, and the same goes for agriculture. If the system is not working or the water is not being safe, then you have those problems, and of course for that. So in other words, we have to go just beyond water quality and quantity and think of what are the other threats and challenges that we have to deal today. So taking that into account, we need to improve modeling, we need to improve analysis, and we need to use our technology to supply and keep our systems and our water. So one final statement that I would like to leave with you for today is that capacity building and education related to these physical science are pillar for attaining a sustainable world and therefore sustainable water security. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Perfect for a city like Miami, right? We're built surrounded by water, built by the water. So then we have another great presentation by Professor Leslie Paul Thiel from the University of Florida, and I'll leave it here for you.
I don't think I do that. Yeah, I project really well. Thanks for all being here this morning. I'm glad Whitney started out talking about time. I like the Indonesian notion of rubber time. I think I'm on rubber time whenever I get up in front of an audience and start to speak about things I care a lot about. Markus is on chronological time, German time, so he'll let me know when I go well past where I should. So the Climate Pact, something that comes out of the European Green Deal, and it's kind of an interesting thing that you don't hear much about. There's all sorts of ways to get involved. It brings people together in communities. There's these people called climate ambassadors that sort of provide linkages. It's meant to generate new ideas and new practices, to create community and networks. It doesn't have any actual formal goals, apart from this sort of generative, getting people together to think and act and connect about climate issues. In a couple of weeks there'll be a get-together in Brussels for this. They've had them before. So, is it just a sideshow and good PR? Where the real decisions, everything important about climate in Europe is happening in Brussels by policymakers and regulators, but then they have, citizens get together and have this sort of feel-good activities where they're made to feel like they're involved. Or is it an example of thinking like a commons? And I'm going to suggest the latter, that it's an example of thinking like a commons. What is a commons? Well, a commons is shared land or shared natural resources or shared cultural resources like norms and rules that allow you to manage natural resources. Some of you may be familiar with the term from Garrett Hardin's famous article back in 1968, published in Science, Tragedy of the Commons, where he talked about a grassland, shared land. No one's in control. There's no centralized control over a commons. Every cattle grazer has an incentive to put more of his cattle on the land, but if everybody does that, the land is overgrazed to the point of despoilation, and the cattle all starve and everybody's worse off. That's the tragedy of the commons. And Hardin famously said that, the earth is a commons, we have a commons here, and there's a problem because no one's in charge and we've got to figure out how to deal with it. Another guy that I like to think about a lot is Aldo Leopold. He was sort of the father of ecological thinking in the United States. His most famous book is the Sand County Almanac. And he talked about thinking like a mountain. So he used to work for the federal land program, and they used to shoot coyotes and wolves And the idea was the fewer wolves and coyotes, the more protected our cattle are, and the more deer there are going to be for hunters, and that's a good thing. And in fact, in the contiguous United States, not counting Hawaii and Alaska, wolves were virtually exterminated by about 48, or 35, excuse me. Leopold had this powerful event in his life. He was up on a bluff looking down with some of his colleagues, and they saw a bunch of wolves, a mother with some wolf pups, and they started pumping lead into them and trying to kill them, because that was their job. And then he went down, and the mother wolf was dying, but she had what he called this fierce green fire in her eyes. And he watched that fierce green fire be extinguished, and it changed something in him. And then he looked around and realized that with no wolves and no coyotes and that around, the deer populations exploded, and they went past the carrying capacity of the land, they overgrazed it, and the result was ecological collapse. So he talked about thinking like a mountain. That's what he believed the wolf thought like, the deer thought like, the mountain thought like. It was to look at the whole interdependent system, not from a singular point of view of how to maximize a resource like deer or cattle, but from the integrated whole. And so I'm going to talk about thinking like a commons, what it's like to think from the perspective of a community that is living within a commons that has to be managed. And I'm going to talk to you about the commons understood as what's called a complex adaptive system. There's a really fascinating science about this. I won't go too deep into that because we don't have time. But I think thinking like a commons means thinking from the point of view that we live in and we ourselves constitute a complex adaptive system. So really quickly, here's a simple system, a bicycle. You apply particular forces, it does what you expect it to do, pretty straightforward. Here's a complex system. It's composed of multiple simple systems. So you've got the hydraulic system, the electrical system, the pneumatic system. All that gets combined is much more complex, but it's basically a bunch of simple systems put together. A complex adaptive system is a complex system that is capable of responding to shocks or disruptions. It can fix itself. No car fixes itself. It evolves. So the biosphere is obviously a complex adaptive system. And a complex adaptive system has this really cool characteristic of coevolution. And I'm going to just spend a few moments talking about coevolutionary processes. So, you know this guy, right? Charles Darwin. So, interesting fact, many people don't know about him. At one point, a friend sent him an orchid from Madagascar. And he got the orchid and predicted that somewhere in Madagascar there was a moth or a butterfly that had a proboscis, basically kind of a long tongue, that was close to 1 meter in length. That's a pretty wild thing to predict. But based on this orchid, which had a nectary which was that long, that's where a tongue of a moth would have to go to get the nectar, and that's what it used for pollination, he made that prediction. He never lived to see if it was true. But about 40 years later, they did find the Sphinx moth, and it does have this wild proboscis which can go deep into the flower to pollinate it and to get its food. Now the wild thing about this is there's no one in charge of this system. The moth and the orchid have to evolve together in kind of an evolutionary dance. Because if you have an orchid that has a nectary that is longer than any tongue out there, it can't propagate. And if you have a moth that has a proboscis that is longer than it needs, it's going to be evolutionary disadvantages as well. So somehow these things co-evolve in an unscripted dance. J.E. Lovelock came up with the Gaia hypothesis. He was tasked to, he worked for NASA and they were trying to figure out whether there was life on Mars. And one proposal was to send a mechanical device there to search for it. Very technologically challenging and very expensive. He proposed rather, we'll just look at the atmosphere of Mars from afar and see if there are telltale signals of life in the atmosphere. Well, you know, if the planet's alive, it's going to be producing carbon dioxide, there's going to be oxygen and so forth. So he did that, just using telescopes and means to analyze the atmosphere, and he predicted correctly that Mars was dead. Then he went on to suggest that the Earth was this complex adaptive system that created the conditions of life on it without anybody being in charge. So you had all the systems of the Earth working together. And he gave this cool example of what he called daisy world, where you have these white daisies and these black daisies. If the white daisies overproduce, and there are white daisies everywhere, they reflect all the light back into the atmosphere, and eventually the planet cools down to where the daisies can't reproduce. The black daisies absorb more light, so more black daisies grow, and they flourish. White daisies die out, but then with the world covered in black daisies, it absorbs too much heat, the planet overheats, and the daisies die out. And so you have this dynamic of white and black daisies keeping the temperature of the planet appropriate for life. No one's in charge. A coevolutionary process. The difference is, when we think of commons, that is people getting together to manage natural resources, they are engaged in coevolutionary processes, but they also have something called consciousness. They can think about what they are doing. Unlike the daisies, they can plan ahead. And so in a commons, a human commons, coevolution and consciousness can symbiotically work together. That's what I think is happening in something like the Climate Pact. You have a bunch of people that are being brought together, they're doing networking, they're coming up with ideas, they have consciousness, so they're thinking ahead, they're trying to plan, but a lot of what happens isn't scripted. It's like the daisies working together, or it's like the coevolution of the moth and the orchid. None of it's scripted, but nonetheless you are getting what complex adaptive systems are capable of, which is self-organization without centralized control. People get together and they do stuff like, here's an example, a bunch of parents that got together and decided we're going to actually figure out if we can cordon off some streets so that at the time of, in the morning, kids can bike to school with their parents without cars being around to make it dangerous, produce carbon at the same time. And so a number of European cities have this going on, where you have these bike-friendly streets for part of the day so kids can come and go to school. That's the sort of unscripted, generative ideas that can come out when you bring people together and form a commons, shared cultural resources, norms, and rules that allow for sort of co-evolutionary processes. A couple things just to think about if you're thinking in terms of complex adaptive systems and commons, that structures, rules, and norms matter. It's not about just sort of anarchy and anything goes. When we're speaking, especially if we are engaging in poetry or just freedom of speech, the freedom comes from all the structure that exists in language. If we don't have the grammar, if we don't have syntax and semantics, it's just gibberish. So you need the structure to enable, to empower, to allow for the processes to happen. Diverse dynamic relationships matters. A lot of really interesting research that shows that the most creative and best problem-solving groups are not those that have the highest caliber expertise, but those that have the most diverse relationships. A bunch of different people with different skill sets. And what that does is it prevents premature foreclosure of ideas where all the experts agree this is the way we should go, and then nothing else is thought about. So great research on that. So this isn't just sort of, something I think is great to have, diversity. The research suggests that in groups where you're dealing with complex problems to solve, diversity really matters and helps. Complex adaptive systems are capable of something called emergence. That's where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So, you can't figure out consciousness by just studying neurons. No neuron has consciousness. Put them all together, and you get something like consciousness. You can't figure out what life is just by looking at the molecules that are involved in a human body. But you get all those molecules together and you have something that is greater than the sum of the parts, life. All complex adaptive systems have this capacity for emergence, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that comes about because Anderson had this notion that more is different. It's not just a quantitative difference, it creates a qualitative difference because of all these interactions and the innovation generation that comes from that. I like this Sufi adage. You think because you understand one, you must understand two, because 1 and 1 makes 2, but you must also understand and. And so it's that notion that when you get diverse peoples together, interacting and collaborating, they're more than the sum of their parts. There's the capacity for emergence, where new and beneficial things can come out of it. I'm not going to get, because of chronological time, I'm not going to get to all of this, but I'll just say that the research that I do suggests that if we're going to try to get consciousness to complement coevolution within commons, there's 4 things that are really beneficial to do. Deepen diversity, distribute intelligence and leadership. That's what's happening in the Climate Pact. You have these climate ambassadors, you have a bunch of people that can take leadership positions. Embrace disturbance. We often think of disturbance or turbulence as something you want to get rid of, but it's like the grain of sand in an oyster that produces novel things and beneficial things. And practice safe-to-fail experimentation. Not just going out there and, say, starting wars with no end game in mind, but experiments that are safe to fail. Because we have to learn by doing, there's no alternative, we just don't know enough to do otherwise. And again, I think the Pact is a good example where people are going out there and they're trying things. A lot of them aren't going to work out, and some of them will. And the ones that do work out can sort of co-evolve together such that the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts.